Craig Worth is a real globetrotter. While in Israel recently, he was thinking all about the locations here in Utah that are named after places in the Holy Land. So he visited those sites and tells us that a couple of them even look like Utah. Craig Worth takes us to the original Moab, the Jordan River, Mount Nebo, and even the Jericho sand dunes. It's today's Worth Watching.
This is the southern Utah we all know and love. Well, except for some 2,000-year-old Roman ruins. It is actually Israel. And that range lining the Dead Sea in Jordan is Moab. There is no doubt that this is Moab. Now, up on top of that range is Mount Nebo. Well, not exactly the Mount Nebo of Juab and Utah counties, but one of the number of Utah places named after biblical locations.
What happened was these steps took you to the top of a flat walkway.
There is a scholar who knows them all and their Utah counterparts. The Reverend Canon Mary June Nestler has been an archaeologist and teacher throughout the Holy Land for decades.
I want you to find the city wall. That's a 4th century wall.
She now lives in Jerusalem as the course director of the prestigious St. George's College in Israel. Prior to this work, she lived in Utah for a decade.
My goodness, Israel looks so much like parts of Utah.
That's the same way I feel. That's what I've been trying to tell everybody.
Sometimes I'll look up and wonder where I am.
Of course, you will find the 156-mile-long River Jordan in the Holy Land, and it is surprisingly about the size of the Jordan River in Salt Lake County.
Stop lying.
I don't lie.
Tell the truth.
I'm telling the truth.
And like the Utah counterpart, and like the Utah counterpart, and like the Utah counterpart, people have lived along its banks for thousands of years. And how about the Jericho sand dunes of Utah? Well, this is Jericho, and these are the dunes of the Judea Desert. Now, the dunes aren't quite as sandy as in Utah, more rocky, but you can see that they were well named in Utah. Now, Canon Nestler says you'll find hundreds of locations in America named after biblical places, not just because they look like their counterparts, but because religious people honor those places with the new locations in America.
They had no idea, in most cases, what the actual biblical places looked like. But they were dear to them, dear in their hearts, and when they founded places and they needed to name a river, they needed to name a town, they naturally looked to the scriptures for inspiration.
But whether pioneers saw these places or were just inspired by the accounts in the Bible, Utah is pretty close to much of the land. For example, I just thought that this canyon looked like the land outside of Price.
Well, it's a lot of fun because when I'm riding around and I see the name of a place that I know from Utah and I know I'm halfway around the world, it jogs my memory of good things.
Oh, and of course there is the Dead Sea. Now you can't help but think of the Great Salt Lake, and why isn't our Salt Lake really named after the Dead Sea? Well, actually, it does have the same name as the body of water when you look at the literal translation of the name in Hebrew.
Yam HaMelach in Hebrew is the Salt Sea.
What?
So, Utah has a Great Salt Lake, and Israel and Jordan have a Great Salt Lake.
But in Hebrew, it has pretty much the same name.
Exactly the same name.
And there is the same issue when one floats like a cork in this water. You usually do it only once. But again, it's interesting to see Utah is a lot like the Holy Land in topography, well, except for the Roman roads. Well, do you see Utah here? Okay, in your imagination. Craig Worth, News for Utah at the Dead Sea.
Utahns have made reservations to see the Dead Sea Scrolls exhibition that opened Friday at the Leonardo. Aside from simply experiencing these fascinating manuscripts and learning of their history, many are hoping to make a connection of faith. During our trip to Israel, I asked those questions. From these caves in the Judean desert came what some scholars and archaeologists believe is the greatest find ever. Ancient manuscripts that describe how a group of people lived in this wilderness and what they believed. The scrolls include the books of the Old Testament. For people of faith, they connect two of the world's main religions.
Over 900 manuscripts, religious manuscripts, that were written 2,000 years ago. It's the times when both Judaism and Christianity were formalizing as we know them today.
Caves of Qumran.
Archaeologist Uzi Dahari showed us the caves where the scrolls were discovered. Although the scrolls do not include manuscripts from the New Testament, one of the visitors to Qumran may have been John the Baptist. There is some belief that John the Baptist was a member of the Essenes or one of these sects.
I do think so, at least according to the New Testament.
Although the scrolls do not include manuscripts from the New Testament.
Shit, I believe the NBA is going to restart their season tomorrow. That doesn't make it true.
Although the scrolls do not include manuscripts from the New Testament,
we can understand it. He lived here in the desert. He used to purify himself and his disciple in the Jordan River, and so on. So why not to believe?
Professor Shalom Paul is responsible for the scrolls publication. He told me they contain the idea of a Messiah.
And in the scrolls several times it's mentioned not one but two Messiahs. One from the house of David, which would be a royal Messiah, and one from the house of Aaron, which would be a priestly Messiah.
What you talking about? What you talking about? What you talking about? What you talking about, Willis?
One from the house of David, which would be a royal Messiah, and one from the house of Aaron, which would be a priestly Messiah.
Stop lying.
I don't lie.
Tell the truth.
I'm telling the truth.
Thank you, Cap. Woo!
Congratulations.
And the scrolls include another reference found in the New Testament.
It says, "Thou shalt be called the Son of God and the Son of the Most High." That's Luke. That's Luke. Now, in the scroll itself, as always happens when we investigate these material, right before it's broken. And you don't know whom he's referring to.
They don't prove Mormonism. They actually don't prove Christianity either, but they provide the context. They provide the context of the world of Jesus.
Rebuild the temple.
Although the scrolls do not include manuscripts from the New Testament,
Rebuild the temple in Jerusalem.
Professor David Seeley teaches at BYU's Jerusalem Center for Near Eastern Studies. In the early 80s, he was a member of the international team of translators of the scrolls and believes the exhibition in Salt Lake will be very intriguing to Latter-day Saints.
We understand that there's other scriptural books, for example, that existed in antiquity. We have fragments of the Book of Enoch, for example, at Qumran. We have fragments of the Book of Melchizedek, right? Of those figures that we hold dear to our hearts. And truly, they are a voice from the dust. They will speak to us from a long time ago.
What we have, Professor Seeley says, is nothing short of a miracle. Beautifully handwritten on parchment.
I'm very fortunate to have
deeply personal and very spiritual expressions, more than 2,000 years old. What
where they came from out of the desert, wow.
It is a wow.
And where they came from out of the desert, wow.
It is a wow. So whether you're fascinated by the faith connection or you just love ancient history,
Wow. So whether you're fascinated by the faith connection or you just love ancient history.
The other artifacts are incredible too. You should see this. The exhibit will be at the Leonardo through April 27th.
A structure relocation. That's what they did. They removed our artifacts, our buildings back home. And you can see it around the world, people. That's what they did. They had well over 2,000 years to do it. It's not that hard. You can see it every day. How they move a house, move a building. They had that technology back then. Check this out. Look at this. This is in New York now. They stole all the ancient artifacts, brick by brick, took it back home, and built over the rubble. That's what they did. And let's clear up this Middle East crap. You know, Israel is in the Middle East. That's North Africa. And by the way, where in the hell is your Middle North, Middle South, and Middle West? Here's the thing. When them Europeans were marching east, they was in the middle of their eastward journey. That's where that came from. Middle East. The hell out of here.
Most Egyptologists and anthropologists, archaeologists of the Eurocentric persuasion will say that Egypt is in Africa. They had to concede that, but then they still draw the line by saying that they weren't Africans like that. In other words, they weren't dark-skinned people. And of course, this is all part of the Great Deception. And the reality is that if they give up Egypt, ancient Kemet, if they give that up and say that that was a part of Black Africa, then they will also have to give up Israel. And that's why they draw the line at Egypt, because if they give up Egypt, they've got to give up Israel.
Now, we're going to go over here, and I'm going to show you where Israel sits on the African tectonic plate, which means that Israel is northeast Africa. Now, when we look at this map, this is the Sinai, okay? This is the Red Sea. This is Egypt. This is the Sinai. This is Israel. All right, this is Saudi Arabia over here. Now, if you see this in Hebrew, it says Haluach Africani, the African plate. Here it is right here. Israel is sitting right here. Israel is sitting on the Haluach Africani, which means that Israel is northeast Africa.
Without question, we are in Northeast Africa. We are landlocked to Egypt, with the exception of the Suez Canal, which was a man-made ditch, a boundary now between, in fact, it's not even really a boundary anymore since Egypt has reclaimed the Sinai Peninsula. But nevertheless, even those of us who are Pan-Africanists in our thinking and Afrocentric, we forget and we leave off that portion of Northeast Africa and don't want to claim anything beyond that.
Europeans classified this area as a Middle East. You know, and then since this the Middle East, the other question, where the Middle West? Where the Middle North and where the Middle South? They don't have no geographical terms like that. And the only reason why they use that term, Middle East, because it disconnects the proper connotation that should go with describing this land geographically.
Now listen closely to what I'm about to tell you. The name Utah, doesn't it sounds very familiar? Utah, Utah, Judah, Judah. Tell these folks to stop playing with you. Wake up.